now talk NBA playoffs. And I really would like to talk some playoffs, but there's so much happening in the NBA as a result of certain teams' playoffs ending that we'll start with first. We welcome in our good buddy, Howard Beck, writing throughout the playoffs for GQ. Howard, how we doing, man?
Doing all right, Craig. How are you?
Doing well. It is crazy how much news there is. And then, by the way, there's the conference finals, which are going to be incredible. But I'll start with the Suns and Monty Williams. In some ways, it's completely unsurprising. There's a new owner. They made a massive trade. They didn't get as far as they wanted, and so the coach got fired. They've also been really good for the majority of his tenure there. How surprised were you that they moved on from Williams so quickly after Ishbia taking over and them getting eliminated before the conference finals?
Nothing surprises me anymore, and nothing surprises me when it comes to new owners coming in, thinking they have all the answers, acting rashly, and not taking full account of things. So that part does not surprise me. And I'm not saying it was necessarily the wrong move by Matt Ishbia, the new owner of the Suns, but I do think it felt very rash and very much in the moment. Usually you try to give yourself, a day, 2, 3 to let the emotions subside, take stock, talk to your basketball people. This did not seem like something that was really well vetted or completely considered in all facets. Monty Williams and Chris Paul in tandem revived that franchise. The Suns were irrelevant for, over a decade. And, it was Monty Williams first and then Chris Paul who, gave them a new identity, a new culture and accountability. And I think that should mean something personally. And I also just think that whatever the Suns' shortcomings were in losing in that 6-game series to the Denver Nuggets, they weren't really much about coaching. And we can always, after the fact, say, or in the midst of a series, say, here's nitpick this part of the rotation or nitpick this matchup decision. That's fine. Like all that's fine and fair. But the Suns' biggest problem was that when they traded for Kevin Durant, they lost a ton of depth, they lost a ton of defense, and there wasn't enough season left to replenish all that. Not to mention, because of Durant's injuries, they didn't even have much time with him to establish chemistry. And you could see Monty Williams hunting and pecking, trying to find combinations in the playoffs because he never could figure out a rotation in the regular season, given how little time there was with a new team and, a newly reconstructed team. And besides that, a lot of players who just weren't reliable rotation players. So, nothing about the Suns' playoffs surprised me in terms of the results. Like I never bought into them as these favorites in the West. I thought they were a potential favorite in the West, but it wasn't a given just because they had Durant and Devin Booker. Their talent drop off after their top 4 was steep. And when they lost Chris Paul and then lost DeAndre Ayton, they just had nothing left. And so those are the factors that you should be considering before firing a guy who was coach of the year just a year ago.
Right. I was with you, by the way. I think we even talked about this on the air that we kind of just didn't understand why everyone was anointing the Suns.
Yeah.
They were going to be really talented, but they needed a lot to go right, and pretty much nothing did for them, starting with when Durant, almost immediately before his debut, I think it was, or a couple days after, turned his ankle in warm-ups. Let me ask you this, Howard. Both your own personal opinion and kind of general league consensus. How good of a coach is Monty Williams? Because, Nick Nurse gets let go, and that dude's awesome. Whoever gets him is getting one of the best in the league. But is Monty Williams just going to walk into another head coaching job and immediately, again, resume being one of the best coaches in basketball? Because it certainly feels like it.
So, interesting kind of data point here. Monty Williams wasn't just coach of the year by vote of the media. I think that was last year. But then 2 years ago when he lost to Tibbs, the Coaches Association, which is all the other head coaches, voted him coach of the year. So he's been coach of the year, twice by 2 different bodies, one being the media and the other being his peers, his coaching peers. That tells you a lot. Monty Williams is universally respected and universally liked. And again, doesn't mean he did everything perfectly. I think he didn't manage his relationship with DeAndre Ayton particularly gracefully, and it was kind of a strange set of circumstances surrounding that relationship. But overall, everyone has great regard for Monty Williams. And I do think, excuse me, I do think we'll see him again soon if he wants to, right? Like, he's got a couple years left on his deal. He could choose to sit out for a bit if he wants to take time and take stock. But as you know, the Raptors have an opening, the Bucks have an opening. It wouldn't surprise me if we see him again very soon.
Right. Local guy. If he wants to help out his hometown basketball team here in D.C. and just go, give Wes Unseld some side knowledge with less pressure of not being head coach. Come on down, Monty. We'd love to have you back in the DMV. Howard Beck with us here on the Hoffman Show, writing all playoffs long for GQ. So that brings us to, I guess let's go to Philadelphia next, because the commentary on the process of it being a failure, I actually started the show with it today because I find it so annoying. This is a team that has won 50 games 4 times in the last 6 seasons, yet somehow has not made a conference final. How do you square those two things in terms of where the failures are and aren't with the Sixers, and thus how they move forward?
Yeah, there's a lot of different layers to this. Let me start with the process thing. The point of the process was not that you could somehow manufacture things to guarantee yourself title contention. Like, there's no such thing. There is no formula, no manipulation, no anything, not through trades, not through the draft, not through anything that you can guarantee yourself title contention or guarantee yourself titles. The point of the process, and I say this just as a matter of fact, I'm not trying to defend it, was that if you are bad enough years in a row, really, really bad, and you get enough bites at the apple, meaning high picks, because the lottery itself is volatile, because drafting is still volatile, give yourself as many chances to get a franchise star as possible. And they succeeded to the extent that they got 2 players who, at least for a time, were both All-NBA, 2 of the best players in the league in Embiid and Ben Simmons. Weird things happen with Ben Simmons that have nothing to do with Sam Hinkie or the process or tanking or anything else. Just Ben Simmons things happen to Ben Simmons. Joel Embiid, rough start to his career, but has settled in as one of the greatest players in the game and was MVP this season. So if the point of the process was to get a franchise star that you could then build a contender around, it worked. They got Joel Embiid and for a time had Ben Simmons. They misfired on Markelle Fultz. They misfired on
Jahlil Okafor.
Thank you, Jahlil Okafor.
Yeah. Nerlens Noel.
So forgettable that I couldn't actually remember his name on the fly. But the point is not that you're going to ace the draft every time you pick top 3. There is no acing the draft. That's why you want multiple chances. Anyway, yes, they have been one of the best teams in the East for several years running now. So, yeah, it worked. If the standard for it worked as a championship, well, then a lot of things don't work a lot of the time for most of the league.
Right.
Is this era somehow a failure? I mean, there are a bunch of teams we could look at over the course of NBA history who were perennial contenders and never broke through. And they're not all failures for never having broken through, because only a handful of teams win championships in this league, because this has been a dynasties type of league. It's often, or it's LeBron getting there multiple times over the course of a decade, or it's the Warriors dominating for X number of years. And so you can't make that the standard for declaring any particular team's strategy a success or failure. Did your strategy get you to a point where you are a perennial contender? That's the thing. The Sixers have been on, by whatever measure, 50-win seasons, playoff runs. I know they haven't made the conference finals. I get it. And not for a weird bounce of the ball from Kawhi Leonard in Toronto that year, maybe things are different. And other bets that they have made are the ones that haven't worked out, right? Like James Harden has not worked out for them so far in one full season and one half of a season. James Harden might leave. That will set them back. There are other personnel moves. Deciding to let Jimmy Butler walk in order to keep Tobias Harris, probably not the best strategy a few years back. That has nothing to do with whether or not the process was a quote-unquote success or failure.
I totally agree, and you just did a better truncated version of the segment I did earlier. And the other thing that I would add, though, Howard, which kind of leads to the second part of the question, is it's also not over. Like, the point of the process was not just to be competitive immediately, it obviously was very much not to be competitive immediately, but once you were competitive, not just to be like, oh, let's try it for a couple years. It was like, hey, if we hit on multiple of these guys, we might be good for a decade. And they hit so hard on Embiid that they probably will be competitive for the better part of a decade. They're already 6 years into it and 4 50-win seasons. So assuming that, they continue to be competitive, what steps could help them break through? Is Doc Rivers in trouble? And then what potential roster moves, either generally or specifically, could be at play for them?
Daryl Morey was hired after Doc, and that's always a recipe for potential trouble. I think Daryl has been very supportive of Doc since he got there, but when you flame out a couple times, and there's been questions about Doc's coaching anyway, he would probably be squarely in the crosshairs. I don't know how that's going to play out. We'll see. Unlike the Suns, they haven't rushed to do it within 24 hours after losing. So, give that a little bit of time, but it wouldn't surprise me in the least if they decide to make a coaching move. But their problem is that, in large part, and, look, we could talk about Embiid as well, but James Harden has a bad postseason record. He just does. He's had some good games in playoffs, but in the games that matter most, when the series is on the line, he tends to fade. And he was doing that even in his prime years with Houston, and we've just seen it again 2 years in a row with the Sixers, where he just kind of goes meekly sometimes. And Embiid's had his own bumps, but Embiid was hurt again. And look, I thought it was fair for Doc to say it yesterday that he said something to the effect of, I wish we could see one postseason where Joel Embiid's actually healthy. And it's true that everyone's banged up this time of year. I get that, but Embiid wasn't just banged up. It wasn't just like, oh, my ankles are sore and I'm tired. He had a serious, ligament injury in his knee that happened in that first round series against the Nets. And if this were regular season, he probably wouldn't have even been playing the last couple of weeks. So what do they do? Where do they go from here? I mean, everything actually starts with whether or not James Harden stays. And if the rumblings are true that he wants to go back to Houston, that Houston wants him, and he leaves, unless they somehow manufacture a sign and trade, that's a blow. And I don't even know how they go about replacing him. I don't think they've got a lot of wiggle room. But Daryl Morey's pretty creative. I assume that whether Harden stays or goes, they're going to be pretty aggressive this offseason.
So, not to turn this into a trade machine-a-palooza here, but one thing that has been rumored for a while, for good reason, is that Joel and Bradley Beal would love to play together. They're both true handling guys. They're very good friends. And the question here is kind of when you look at the players and the salaries and everything is, could you get like a Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey for Bradley Beal, which a couple of years ago is a home run. Philly does it without even thinking. With where Beal is now and with where Maxey is now, do you think there's any chance that Philadelphia would go for that?
No. I was a big advocate for a few years back when Ben Simmons was still an All-NBA guy. I was a big advocate for Ben Simmons for Bradley Beal. I thought that would have been the move for both teams back in the day because Beal and Embiid would have been phenomenal together. Simmons would have given the Wizards somebody new to build around, younger guy to build around. Tobias Harris and Maxey, I think Harris is going into the last year of his deal. But Maxey's a blossoming young star, and as good as Beal is, he can't stay healthy. His contract is way beyond his actual value. He's a really good player, but that contract is brutal. If the Wizards are trading Bradley Beal under whoever their new GM is, if Ted Leonsis finally sanctions trading Bradley Beal, which I don't know if that's ever going to happen, I don't know that Beal actually gets you value in return. The size of that contract combined with Beal's injury history, he hasn't exactly, how many years since he's been an All-Star? He's never been All-NBA, and he's never been All-NBA. I don't know if that's a negative value contract, but it's going to be hard to get full value in return. And to me, that means that the Sixers are not giving up a really promising Tyrese Maxey plus other stuff in a deal for Beal.
That is what I think as well. The NBA always surprises us with these kinds of things with stars. But I just think Maxey has been he's arguably been their second best player over Harden, even though Harden, led the NBA in assists. He doesn't he had a bad year, but he's certainly not the player that he used to be. And his playoff stuff is very, very real, like you mentioned earlier. Howard Beck with us here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming on YouTube as well, youtube.com/@theteam980. The last team we can do a quick postmortem on, Howard, is the Warriors. such a bizarre series because it felt like the Warriors could do it if they could just hit shots. And who knew that the Warriors' downfall in any season would be that Klay Thompson all of a sudden couldn't hit a shot. But he goes 3 for 19 in Game 6. It's pretty clear that there's a desire to keep that core together. But realistically, with where they are, do you think that's the best thing for them? And what other options do they have to move around Thompson, Curry, and Green?
So you start with the GM, actually. First, they need to re-sign Bob Myers, because I think if Myers is still there, and I think it seems that Bob Myers is just kind of considering his own options. It's not just about pay or contract; it's about what he wants to do. But if Myers stays, like Bob Myers has such great relationships with the players, that's going to affect everything else. Meaning, Draymond Green is eligible for an extension and can opt out. Klay Thompson is eligible for an extension, and you have to walk a delicate line with your core stars who have won you 4 championships when you're saying, look, we want to keep you here and we want to keep this core around Steph, but we have to be careful about our salary cap situation. We've got to bring our luxury tax bill down. The new CBA is going to make it really hard on teams to keep spending at that level and still be able to add to their roster. So you need somebody who's got the trust of the relationships and the rapport with your stars so that you can say, we may not be able to pay you as much as you want, right? You might have to be less than a max player now at this stage of your career. You're in your 30s, you're slowing down. Let's find a middle ground. So I think start with Bob Myers. Keep Klay Thompson and Draymond Green. I think they have to make some bold changes. That probably means trading at least one of their young guys. I don't know what to do about Poole. I don't know where his contract is, right? As an asset. He's a really talented young player. He showed some real promise, especially a year ago in their run to the championship, but obviously way underperformed in this postseason. Is his contract now a negative value contract? Maybe. It's pretty it's pretty sizable, but he also has shown the ability to be a lead guard and play at a really high level, and maybe it's just been harder for him to find the right balance when he's playing with 3 stars so he could be more valuable to a team that really needs him in a primary role as opposed to a supporting role. I just don't know how to assess his value right now. Would they trade Kuminga? Would they trade Moses Moody? They're going to have to do something. They do need to replenish. They do need some youth. They got caught in between, right? They had veterans to win the championship. Some of those guys walk. They promote the young guys. The young guys prove to be too young and not quite ready. They pivoted midseason. They trade Weissman for Gary Payton II. That was the right move. But there's just not a lot of flexibility when you're so far above the tax line as they are.
Right. And Moody seems like he might be the best of the bunch right now, even though it feels like he had the lowest ceiling. He's just so consistent. And I agree with you. Trying to figure out Beal and Poole's contract values is going to be fascinating over the next month because those are 2 guys that certainly are on the move, talented, but no idea if they're remotely worth what they're going to be paid. Let's wrap up with a thought or two on the actual basketball, that thing that we actually do all this for, Howard. As Howard Beck is with us here on the Hoffman Show, writing all playoffs long for GQ. In the Western Conference, it is such interesting matchup of styles to me. Do you have an early lean on which style plays out? The up-tempo, offensively oriented Nuggets versus the best defensive team since the All-Star break Lakers, who, by the way, play, I think, faster than people realize.
Yeah, well, because they would prefer to be able to score easily in transition also. I think, the Nuggets and Lakers series is fascinating. I don't know that the Nuggets have truly been tested yet. This is not a knock on them. I'm not saying this is a reason to doubt them, but I'm having a hard time assessing how good or how great the Nuggets actually are. As a 1 seed, you earn the right to stomp on an 8 seed, which they did, the Timberwolves. But in the second round, the test was supposed to be the Suns, but as we discussed earlier, the Suns were just kind of disintegrating before our eyes. And sure, yeah, they took some blows and went from 2-0 to 2-2 because Booker and Durant got hot, and then they finished them off. But the Suns were so flawed that I just don't know whether they've truly been tested, the Nuggets. The Lakers will provide that test. And Anthony Davis, I think, is certainly the best big that Jokic will have faced in this run, and that he could face, period. Anthony Davis might be the best defensive big in the NBA. So I would start there. That part's fascinating. I wonder if the Lakers could come to be haunted in this series by Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who, of course, was a preseason or off-season pickup by the Nuggets, who was part of the Lakers championship in 2020 that they dismantled. Sent him out in that Westbrook trade, of course. And, I'm curious to see if Jamal Murray can replicate some of what we saw in the bubble from a few years back, and we've seen some of that in this postseason. I don't even know how to handicap this series, to be honest.
Neither do I. It's one of the hardest ones I can remember, except for maybe the other series that's still remaining. I mean, the Celtics are so talented, but they've ebbed and flowed. And then, Howard, the question I really have for you about the East is, can you remember a team like Miami that just completely transformed into a different team? Because, even the Lakers in the West, sure, the storyline is there. They were the 13 seed. They didn't look good. But they completely changed their roster, then progressively got better, and they're peaking at the right time. Their arc makes sense. The Heat just flipped a switch and became the playoff Heat, and here they are in the Eastern Conference Finals. Can you remember a team ever doing something like this?
I mean, we just saw 6, 7, and 8 all advance for the first time in NBA history, but the Heat were not like the Lakers and Warriors, right? The Warriors were trying to fix themselves all season, but we knew that they were the defending champs and still had some, ability to win, at least a series. The Lakers completely remade themselves with a couple of trades mid-season, so they weren't reflective of their record. The Heat were basically the same team from start to finish. We had some injuries in the regular season, but not enough to warrant being as bad as they were. They're also not really an 8 seed. They were the 7th best team in the East by record, but then they lost their play-in game and dropped to 8th.
Right.
So there's a lot of weird stuff about the Heat. I've referred to them as simultaneously underachievers and overachievers, right? Because they underachieved the regular season. They were the best. They had the best record in the NBA, in the Eastern Conference a year ago. And so them finishing 7th in the East was a horrendous underachievement. And then they get to the playoffs and they overachieved. I don't know what all that means. The Heat are they're just weird, but they're also really tough and they're really good. And it's been kind of fun to kind of watch them just bully their way through a couple of rounds. And they're just super impressive. And they're doing it without Tyler Hero, who was, their second best offensive player, who they lost, of course, early in the first round against the Bucks. They lost Victor Oladipo. It's incredible that they're even still standing. I do suspect that this is where the joyride ends, and Cinderella's coach turns back into a pumpkin. The Celtics are too good, too deep, too talented. I will never underestimate the ability of Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, Bam Adebayo to frustrate and fluster and make you work hard and all that stuff. But after they steal a game, maybe 2, I just don't think they've got enough firepower to take a series from the Celtics.
I agree, but it's the kind of thing where if the Celtics mess around, they will find out. And that is the beauty of the Heat. They just will not beat themselves. And if you screw around long enough or you have guys get hurt or anything like that, as the Bucks found out, as the Knicks found out, they will beat you. Howard Beck writing all playoffs long for GQ, a frequent guest here on the show. Always appreciate his time. Howard, thank you so much, sir, and enjoy the conference finals.
Always a pleasure, Craig. Thanks.
You got it, buddy. See ya. That's Howard Beck, everybody, here on the Hoffman Show. When we get back, it is time to have a little bit of fun. We haven't had a chance to talk about the Commanders' schedule yet. No, we're not doing wins and losses. It's a silly thing to do. It's May. Road trips? Now we're talking. That's next on the Team 980.
This is Wes Unseld Jr.
Beal left wing outside the arc, stops, takes a 3. It's there.
You listen to The Hoffman Show on Team 980.
Assassin-like.
The Odyssey app.